This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Information at vachamber.com. Virginia hospitals and health systems provide jobs. They support our economy and promote public health. Local hospitals are always open to help people with unexpected health needs. Having a stable healthcare network is vital. Virginia hospitals are our lifeline.
It's amazing what my students with special needs can accomplish. Their pride is priceless. That's why I teach.
Brought to you by the Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and welcome back to Delegate Joseph Yost from Giles County, representing Giles, City of Radford, and then part of Pulaski and part of Montgomery. And we're having this conversation at a time when you're here in Richmond working on mental health issues, and so that will be our primary focus and maybe our only one, because in our half show that we have, we want you to bring our viewers up to date about what's being studied. And then out of those studies, what are you seeing for the 2017 session? So start with an assessment of where we are right now.
Yeah, if you remember what happened to Senator Deeds back in November 2013, that sort of precipitated a lot of the work that we have going on today in the Commonwealth regarding mental health issues. Following that incident, we created a 4-year study commission, a subcommittee, to look at bringing Virginia's mental health system up to the 21st century. It's composed of 12 legislators, 7 House members, 5 senators. We're about pretty much halfway through that 4 years now. We've been going for 2 years since then. And I think we've made a lot of progress. There's still a lot more work left to be done, more than you could ever fit into a 4-year period. Mental health issues is one of those things that doesn't necessarily receive a lot of attention until there is an incident or a tragedy like what happened to Senator Deeds or at Virginia Tech in 2007. And the only interest we have is once that crisis happens, then we want to talk about it. And then we do a little bit. We might put some more funding towards mental health issues, change some of the laws regarding bringing people into the mental health system, but then we sort of forget about it until something happens again. I think the difference in the work that we're doing now is this has been ongoing as opposed to a lot of previous commissions I've served on in the past, which might meet 6 or 8 months, do a report with some recommendations.
They're
through.
Yes.
And so, moving forward, I think we have done a lot of work. I actually just came from a work group meeting this morning that we were working on, looking at issues around telepsychiatry, which is an innovative model at looking at providing psychiatric and other behavioral health services to folks in areas that might not have access to their practitioner. They might not have a psychiatrist who lives within 100 miles of their area. So basically they're going to their community health provider, linking up through telecom and talking to a psychiatrist who might be in Lynchburg or Charlottesville.
Now, I understand that Veterans Services nationwide has been doing some of that, and probably it's being done. I guess you're learning that it's being done in some other states as well.
Yeah, and it's something that's being done a lot in Virginia, more so than, quite honestly, even I realized. I'm not a huge cheerleader of telepsychiatry. I certainly think it's an effective model and works, but I'm still a believer of bricks and mortar, having that face-to-face dialogue and conversation with somebody. But there's a lot of evidence and studies out there that shows that it can be just effective if done the right way. But some of the issues that you run into relate to a lot of the telepsychiatric services cannot be reimbursed through either traditional insurance models or even through Medicaid programs sometimes. And so those are things that we're going to have to work through to see how we can expand it even further. The University of Virginia, which is probably one of the biggest providers in the Commonwealth of telepsychiatric services, I think has at least 30, if not a couple more, sites across the Commonwealth that they provide these telepsych services to, which I think is pretty neat. Most of them are concentrated where you would expect in rural areas, particularly in Southwest Virginia to the south side, and then into the Middle Peninsula and Northern Neck area.
Oh, that's news to me as well, that they've got that many sites now. Now, is there some way then they work it out to get
Yeah,
some
they will work.
reimbursement?
They will work with the local health provider to create those sites, and then as far as reimbursement go, it's pretty much up to that individual's provider. But one thing that I did not realize, about I think 60% of the folks that they're seeing don't have any type of insurance coverage, which is continuing to be a problem. But even those who do have your traditional insurance or even Medicaid, sometimes they're not willing, or there's certain criteria through CMS that require certain things to be done before they can file for reimbursement. So it still has, I think, a lot of work left to be done on it. But as far as the future goes, especially for rural parts of the state, I think it's something that we're going to continue to look at pretty closely.
Since you were here during the session, there's been, I think, more than one instance of someone committing suicide in a jail. And where are you along in your study at looking at people getting maybe stuck in a jail when really they need to be, and the sheriffs and all would say they need to be getting some mental health services?
And I think that's something that Virginia actually has been looking at for over a decade now. It's something that's been closely studied. We've got probably, I think, one of the best programs in the country when it comes to trying to integrate those services between the justice system and the mental health system. My background actually comes from working with individuals who have a serious mental illness who are involved in the justice system. And we have from crisis intervention teams or CIT programs in Virginia to jail intervention-based models to post-booking programs where individuals might get booked into jail, but then as a condition of their bond, they can get out of jail and get diverted back into the community to get services through the Community Services Board. We actually have a work group that's made up of the 4 different work groups on the subcommittee that's looking at solely justice issues related to mental health issues. But like I said, we've made a lot of progress there. Obviously, there's still more work that needs to be done, but that's actually something that I would feel comfortable saying Virginia actually probably leads the way on the nation in terms of what we've put into that.
That's good. Now, when Secretary Hazel was on recently, he was talking about, I think, community service boards and providing, and how while they're doing the best they can, it's not really the same service necessarily that you would find in a rural area that you might find in an urban area. So is your study looking at ways to kind of help make those services be equally?
I think that's one of the things we are looking at. We certainly have concentrated looking at, in a different work group, on the CSB or Community Services Board system in particular, and whether that's an effective model for providing mental health services. Our community service system was set up, in the 60s and 70s under following what President Kennedy did with our community mental health program. And it's something that has worked fairly well, but I think one of the things that you see in Virginia, if you're in Blacksburg in the River Valley, and we have River Valley Community Services, there's 40 CSBs across the Commonwealth. And if you've seen one CSB, you've seen one CSB. So what we do in Blacksburg may be different from what goes on even next door in Mount Rogers, or completely different than what goes on in Fairfax or Loudoun County or in the Hampton Roads area. And so trying to find some type of standardization for services across the board, because when you look specifically at the code, state law only requires that CSBs provide very few things, mainly being emergency services for folks who are coming into the mental health system for a crisis reason, or once they're discharged from a hospital. CSBs are required to provide follow-up. But beyond that, what other services the CSBs provide varies from area to area, unfortunately. And there's a lot of different models out there. SAMHSA, which is a federal organization looking at mental health and substance abuse issues, is looking at community behavioral health clinics, which provides some standardization. And they've been providing grants not only to Virginia. I think that we have 8 potential sites like that in Virginia. But the point would be that if an individual is in, say, Montana, wants to move to the Commonwealth and is receiving mental health services there, they know that the services they're receiving in Montana are going to link up perfectly when they get to Virginia. So this is not just something we're looking at in the Commonwealth. This is a nationwide thing. And these types of programs really look hard at quality, at access, making sure the individual gets same-day services, which can be a problem from time to time. So I feel like that's probably the direction we're trending on some of these issues.
Okay, what else are you really focusing on in your study? Don't want our time to get by, and you said, I thought David was going to ask me about this. So what?
One of the things that I've looked really closely at over the last 2 years is the children's mental health system. That's something that has received fairly scant attention over the last say 10 years. We spend a lot of time concentrating on the adult system, but not a heck of a lot of time talking about kids. And mental illnesses start early. More often than not, it's usually between the ages of 18 and 25, but they can start much earlier than that. And so some of the work that I've put in is providing additional funding over the last couple of years to children's psychiatric and crisis services. We have a separate study going on through the Department of Behavioral Health and the Department of Education looking at the possibility of doing mental health screenings in schools, the same way we do vision screenings, hearing screenings, scoliosis screenings, asthma screenings. And I think it serves a twofold purpose. One, you have an individual who's getting that screening, and we have that ability to provide, hopefully, early identification, intervention, so we can stop these issues from spiraling out of control down the road. But 2, I think you're going a long way in destigmatizing the mental health population, which is something that we struggle with. It's probably one of the number one issues that we struggle with, because if you're doing a screening with the same screening, other medical screenings like vision or hearing screening, you're treating it like the illness that it is and not sort of separating it from the rest of the pack.
Is that something that you'll be continuing to work on? And
Yeah, we have the final report is due in November of this year. My goal, once that comes out, depending on what the departments say and what recommendations they make, I would hope that we're able to try to do some pilot programs in Virginia over the next couple of years, and maybe full implementation into all of our school divisions down the road.
Well, Delegate Yost, thank you very much for being on This Week in Richmond, for giving our viewers this very helpful update on what's happening, and a look ahead to January of 2017.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Welcome back to This Week in Richmond, and a special welcome back to Clyde Cristman, Director of the Department of Conservation and Recreation.
David, thanks. It's great to be here again.
And we were talking before we were starting about your a little bit more than 30 years of working in government issues, from local government to state government, and yet you still have many years before you'd catch up with the state parks, which are celebrating their big anniversary, I think, this year.
That's right, David. This is the 80th anniversary, June 15th of 1936, when the Commonwealth of Virginia simultaneously opened 6 state parks on the same day. I can't imagine how they did it, because we're working on opening 1, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, I'm sure, coming up in September, but I can't imagine the logistics of opening 6 state parks on the same day back in 1936.
Yeah, with the transportation and the other communication, it must have been different teams of people that were opening them or something to be able to do that.
It'd be interesting to go back and look to see how they celebrated that.
It would. So why don't we go ahead with the one that's going to be opening and talk about the parks, then get to other parts of your whole department.
Sure, absolutely. Well, so on September 24th, Saturday, September 24th, which happens to be National Public Lands Day, we will be with the governor and many members of the General Assembly to celebrate the opening of the Natural Bridge as a state park, once owned by Thomas Jefferson, and since then it's been through a variety of private ownership, and we are now going to be bringing into the state park system.
That is exciting, because many of us in Virginia have been to that park at different times when it was in different ownerships. It's just great to know that it will be continued as a state park.
And it's going to be a little bit unique in that it's somewhat of a public-private partnership in that the Natural Bridge is still owned by a private nonprofit group known as the Virginia Conservation Legacy Fund that was able to preserve it when it literally, the Natural Bridge had literally been developed into to smaller lots, and there was a vision of putting condos and those kinds of things there. And this group of conservationists stepped in, was able to buy it, and they still own it. And so the General Assembly authorized us to enter into a unique partnership where we'll be operating as a state park while it's still in private hands, with the plan that once the private ownership has paid off the loans that they got in order to finance it, that it will then be donated to the Commonwealth.
Very good. You know, I was looking at your website, and we're going to put that address up too, because it's a great website for all the different aspects of your department. And from everything from natural heritage, soil and water, recreation, dams, land conservation, environmental education. We could take a day to talk about all of those, but I'd rather let you start on some of the other ones that you'd like to mention.
Well, you mentioned the Natural Heritage Program, so this is the 30th anniversary of our Natural Heritage Program, and it's incredible the work that's been accomplished in those 30 years with our Natural Heritage Program. We now have 63 natural area preserves, the most recent one being dedicated Bald Knob down in Franklin. It was dedicated just about 3 months ago, so we have 63 natural area preserves that cover almost 56,000 acres of land. And the difference, people ask me all the time, what's the difference between a natural area preserve? Well, so most folks are familiar with our state parks because our state parks, obviously, we work hard to preserve the natural habitat and natural beauty of those properties, but we also work equally as hard to be able to bring the public into them and to provide that interaction between the public and our state parks. So last year we had close to 9 million visits in our state parks. So we're doing really well on getting folks into our state parks. By contrast, our natural area preserves, their primary mission is to protect those critical and vital habitats that support endangered plants and animals. And so in order to become a natural area preserve, the site has to have been documented to protecting a critical habitat like that. And as I mentioned, we now have 63 located all over the state that are protecting a variety of plants and animal species. And we're a little bit quieter about public visitation, although it's something that we're working towards, is to provide a little bit more public visitation. So for example, Crow's Nest, which is one of our larger natural area preserves up in Stafford County, we're working right now to provide a parking area and trail area, and also we have a new canoe and kayak launch. So we're providing some access to the public, but still our primary focus on those properties is protecting the critical environment.
So over that 30 years, donated or purchased by the Commonwealth? How did the Commonwealth, it's probably a mixture, but...
There is a mixture. A lot of it has been donated. Actually, some of them, like I mentioned with Natural Bridge, it's not uncommon in the natural area preserves that they are privately owned for groups like the Nature Conservancy, or just like-minded citizens that own them but have opened their property up to the designation and to allow our staff and guided field trips on those properties. So it's been a variety of sources: federal funding sources, some state funding sources, and we do continue to get donations of both money and property to the Commonwealth to help to expand those natural area preserves.
Quite a busy year. Quite a busy year and all that's going on. So what about soil and water, dams? What's happening in those aspects of your department?
So this is a real exciting year in soil and water conservation. We have a record amount. The General Assembly appropriated $61.7 million from the Water Quality Improvement Fund for this current fiscal year, and we work with the 47 local soil and water conservation districts throughout the Commonwealth. A lot of folks, they show up on Tuesday in November and are asked to cast a vote for their local soil and water conservation district representatives, and that makes up the network. of those local elected officials that are the interface between the Department of Conservation and Recreation and the agricultural community. And so we are working with those districts hand in hand to provide grants to farmers for them to do agricultural best management practices that help to protect the water quality. Ultimately, the Chesapeake Bay, as you know, we're under some deadlines that have been set by the EPA for 2025 to have the Chesapeake Bay fully restored, and 2017 is a milestone year coming up where we have to report our progress along with the other Chesapeake Bay states. And so the funding that we have available in this current fiscal year is really critical. One of the big projects that we've been working on is to work with the farmers to fence off streams so that livestock can't get into the streams, because it's a very, very bad practice that obviously the cows have to drink, and so the farmers have to come up with alternatives. And so you fence the livestock out of the stream, which protects the stream bank from erosion. It prevents the livestock from going to the bathroom in the stream,
Right.
And then providing alternative watering sources, pumps and wells and troughs that the animals can drink out of. It's been a very successful program in the Commonwealth. And over the last couple of years, we have just gotten an enormous interest from the agricultural community, because they see the benefits. Farmers want to be good stewards of our land.
Sure.
They see the benefits to that, both from protecting their land, but also the evidence is that the herds are healthier because of the fact that they're not drinking in that same water that's being degraded. They're drinking from nice clean water coming out of wells, and also the cows aren't standing in the marsh and in the wetlands, which causes problems with their hoofs. So it's a dual benefit to both the farmers as well as to all the citizens of the Commonwealth.
So that grant money will probably be used up then, I would imagine, with working with the farmers.
Well, the Code of Virginia requires us to do a needs assessment of how much money we really do need to be putting into the program. And right now the needs assessment would say we need about $100 million a year. So the fact that we've got a little over 60 this year is a pretty doggone good start, step in the right direction. And again, working, each soil and water conservation district works with their farmers. The farmers apply for the grant funds, and the grant funds are actually awarded through a very objective process known as a conservation. It's a KEF score, the conservation equivalency score, that ranks the projects out as to the benefit that we'll get from reducing nitrogen and phosphorus and sediment going into state waters.
Excellent, excellent. Virginia has not been hit in the same way that Louisiana has at the time, but as we think about the potential for 100-year or 1,000-year rainfall, then we think about the dams, and what aspect of the dams protection falls in your department?
So we have over 2,000 dams in the Commonwealth of Virginia that fall under the purview of the regulation of our agency.
2,000?
Over 2,000.
Over 2,000.
And it's based on a combination of the height of the dam and the amount of area of water that is retained by the dam. In many of those cases, many of these dams are privately owned. It wasn't uncommon back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s where a developer would come in and dam a stream up and then make a nice waterfront community, and then they would set up a homeowners association that then became responsible for the maintenance of the dam. And here we are some 50 years later, and those dams are in a variety of conditions. Some actually very, very good, very well maintained, some not so. And as you mentioned, particularly with Hurricane Katrina, at a national level, the dam safety standards were upgraded. And so Virginia had to respond likewise in getting our dam safety standards up to an area where we feel that they can withstand those kinds of flooding events like what you've seen recently in Louisiana. We had a bit of a scare last year, you might recall, where there was a hurricane that never happened but came up the coast, but there was a low pressure center that was over South Carolina, and South Carolina had over 3 dozen dams fail, including a series of 3 that took out Interstate 95 for several days. And so those are the kinds of events that we wish to avoid. And so we work with dam owners that can be homeowners associations. Actually, our state parks have a number of dams, and I'm proud to say they're all in really good shape. and local governments own dams for water supply, and there's a lot of flood control dams out in the valley that we also work that are owned by those same soil and water conservation districts that we work with for the agricultural best management.
Clyde, thank you very much for being on This Week in Richmond. We're out of time. We're going to have you back again.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community. For jobs, the economy, and public health, Virginia Hospitals, our lifeline.
The Virginia Education Association, because a good education is good for everybody.
Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.